Finally, today we're going to run through a bunch of, just take a quick minute to discuss a bunch of other policies here and look at their impacts on voting. So we'll talk about all sorts of different policies about voting and whether they increase or decrease voter turnout. First up, we have what's called voter purges. States are allowed to what's called purge their voter rolls, which means they remove people from the list of registered voters. So states may decide to do this from time to time. They may have a policy to do this all the time. This means that voters who were previously registered to vote are now no longer registered, and they have to re-register. And the trouble here is that states don't notify people when they are purged. So oftentimes people don't know that they have been removed from the voter rolls, and they don't find out until they show up to vote. And at that point, it's usually too late to register to vote. States usually do this they'll say that they do this for voters after a certain period of like a voter skipping elections. So like, for example, in Tennessee, if you don't vote in either of two consecutive presidential elections, so like if you skip two presidential elections in a row, they assume that you are no longer a Tennessee voter. They assume that you've moved somewhere else, or maybe you've passed away, or something like that. So you'll be purged from the voter rolls in Tennessee if you don't vote. Now, this is to get voters off of the registered list that no longer should be voters. For example, if you move to a different state, you should not be registered to vote in Tennessee anymore. When people pass away, that doesn't automatically remove them from the voter roll, because the voter roll they don't keep track of who dies and stuff like that. So this is why states purge voters, but it can often impact people who are not dead or have not moved away. And so this is a barrier to voting. Another policy we want to think about is, what do we do about people that have been convicted of a felony? States don't allow people to vote while they're serving time, so some states will take away their right to vote permanently. This is a state-to-state policy, so it depends on like where you are convicted of a felony. Where you live, whether or not you will get the right to vote again. So you can see on the map here, the states in dark blue allow ex-felons to vote. The states in light blue allow them to vote after they have finished their prison sentence. So that means, that in the blue states, they're allowed to like vote absentee or whatever, but in the light blue states, they have to wait until they've completed their prison sentence. There are some states that allow them to do it after parole or after their sentence is completed, but the states in the peach color, those states don't allow felons to vote ever again. Like, they've lost their right to vote because they were convicted of a felony. So if we have even one ex-felon who wanted to vote and they are now denied the right to vote, this is a policy that decreases voter turnout. Residency requirements are also a policy that can decrease voter turnout here. Some states will make you live in the state. Make you establish residency for a certain period of time before you can register to vote. It's not super long. It's like a month. But states want to prevent people from just moving there for the election. So you can see on the map here, the states in maroon make you live in a place for 30 days before you're allowed to register to vote. The states that are in kind of tan or in orange, those are, about 3 weeks. You have to be there 3 weeks before you can register to vote. The states in green allow you to register to vote as soon as you get there. So those are our most lenient states, but the states that are any color other than green require you to be a resident for a certain period of time before you're allowed to register to vote. And then we have to consider the fact that you also have those deadlines we talked about earlier for when you can register. So in Tennessee, if you have to live here for 30 days before you can register to vote, and you have to register to vote 30 days before the election, you really have to live here 60 days before the election before you can exercise your right to vote. So this decreases voter turnout for people who move right around election time. Polling locations, another thing that seems like it doesn't have any impact on anything, but actually decreases the ability of people to vote. You are assigned to a specific polling location, and your polling location is based on your address. So that means your polling location is near your home, and that is convenient for some people. And this is one of the reasons why you have to constantly update your voter registration. Every time you move, you need to update your voter registration because you'll be assigned a new polling place. For example, my polling place when I was 18 was at my parents' house out by Ridgeway High School. And when I came back from college, I didn't live anywhere close to them, but I never updated my voter registration. So if I wanted to vote, I had to drive way out to my parents' house and and vote out there. Now, my polling place is close to my home downtown, but I'm an example of a worker who is gone away from my home for the vast majority of the voting hours on election day. So even though like White Station High School has often served as a polling place, like that's where I am all day during the election. And so if voting was taking place in the front of the gym, that's a very convenient place for me to go vote since it's like 10 feet away from where I am working, but I'm not allowed to vote there. I have to vote back near my house, and that limits my ability to cast a vote on election day because I can't exactly leave the school to go vote. So obviously, this doesn't prevent everyone from voting, but it does make voting less convenient. Voters have to be aware of their voting location, and those can change. And voters can't just report to whichever location is most convenient. Like you can't just stop at any voting location on your way home from work and vote there. So this is one more thing that decreases voter turnout because it is one more obstacle for people to cast their vote. Student voting. This is an important one for you guys, and unfortunately, this has become more difficult since even when I was in college. This is the maps here show us states that have passed laws. The states in red have passed laws that negatively impact students' ability to vote in elections. Here's the basic thing here. In most cases, when you are going to like live on a college campus next year, you're not going to have a real address. You're going to have a P.O. box. So you won't have like an address in order for you to establish yourself as a resident of that state if you live out of state. You're probably going to vote absentee voting based on your parents' address. Like you guys are probably going to vote in the next election by mailing in your vote, and it will be based on your parents' address, and you'll be voting for Tennessee governor and Tennessee congressman and things like that, not the state where you're living for college. So some states have passed laws that specifically say students aren't considered residents. That would mean that you have to like rent an off-campus house to establish yourself as a resident and things like that. A lot of states with photo ID laws, particularly these states on the bottom map in red, do not accept college IDs as valid state photo IDs, even though those are photo IDs that are issued by state institutions. So some IDs count, but college IDs don't count. So these policies have made it more difficult for students to vote, which serves to decrease voter turnout. Out-of-state students are typically not considered to be residents of the state that they attend college in. The only way that you establish residency in your new state is you end up like living there. Like you rent housing off of campus. You get a driver's license in that state with your new address and things like that. When you show up to vote on election day, if you have, like as a student, if your voter registration is from one place, like if I was living in an off-campus house in New Orleans, Louisiana, but my driver's license had my old Memphis, Tennessee address, that's going to be an invalid registration and I won't be able to vote. Absentee voting is one that we talked a lot about in the 2020 election because a lot of states adjusted their rules to deal with the dangers of the COVID pandemic. But in general, absentee voting is voting by mail. This is for people that can't be at their polling place on election day. This is like how college students vote. This is how members of the military vote. This is a completely normal thing that has happened in every election for as long as we have had elections. Some states will allow what we call no excuse absentee voting. You can see that in the states in kind of the medium color blue there. What that means is all you have to do, you go on the website, you say, I'd like to vote by mail, and they mail you a ballot. The states in dark blue here, these are new policies, Washington, Oregon, Utah, and Colorado. These are states that automatically mail a ballot to every voter in the state. So they don't even have to request. They just go ahead and mail a ballot to everyone, and that automatically gives every voter a reminder that they can just write their vote down, put it in the mail if they want to. A lot of states, so the states that don't have no excuse absentee voting in the lightest blue or almost white color there, those states require the voter to justify why they need to vote by mail. So you have to give them a reason. Maybe you're super old, or maybe you're going to be out of town. Maybe you're a college student, or you're serving in the military or something like that. Not all reasons are accepted as valid. In fact, some states in 2020 passed laws saying that fear of COVID was not a reason. So states can deny your right to vote by mail in those states in the lightest colors on the map. So this These policies, depending on which way they go, the dark blue states would be policies that increase voter turnout. The medium blue states probably increase voter turnout since they allow you to vote by mail. The lightest color of states there would be decreasing voter turnout because they make it a little more difficult to vote by mail. Finally, we've got early voting. Some states set aside time periods that allow people to vote before Election Day. The purpose here is to make voting more convenient. This decreases a barrier, and the barrier would be voting on a Tuesday or limited hours for voting. So if you're going to be busy on Election Day, or you have a job where it's difficult to leave and vote or something like that, you take advantage of early voting. Early voting, it's more convenient in a lot of ways because you make the voting fit your schedule. In a lot of places, at early voting, you can vote in any location possible. So that removes the problem of having an assigned voting location. Like when I early vote here in Tennessee, I just stop by a place on the way home from work. Very simple. Tennessee is actually a really good state about early voting. They have a lot of time for early voting here. You can see on the map here, the states in the tan all have early voting. The states in brown, dark brown, all have early voting, but those are the states we just said automatically mail everyone a ballot anyway. So you have a choice of going to vote whenever you want or mailing your vote in whenever you want. The purple states have what's called in-person absentee, which that means they have early voting, but you have to tell them why you're voting early. So just like that, you show up to early vote and you say, hey, I'm doing this because I'm old and it's easier, or I'm doing this because I'm going to be out of town on Election Day, or I can't get out of work on Election Day, something like that. The states in gray, these are the states that have no early voting. So especially our nearby friends, Mississippi, Alabama, Kentucky, Missouri, these states do not allow any early voting. So that makes it very difficult to vote on Election Day. That means the lines are going to be longer. Everyone in the state that wants to vote is trying to cast their vote in the same 12-hour window. States without early voting decrease turnout because they are limiting voter access. The more early voting that a state allows, that is more increasing of voter turnout. That's making it easier and easier for the voters to participate. All right, that's it with our voting laws. Let's take a minute and look at our bigly ideas here. It's been a while since we've seen our friend President Trump on the golf course, so it looks like he just hit a big shot there. Looks like he's hitting out of the rough with a fairway wood. I don't know what he's doing, but I'll trust him that it was a good shot. Today, we want to make sure that we're able to explain all the ways that the right to vote has been expanded over time. So we got to start from the Constitution. We got to remember that this is a thing that's left up to states, but we think about the federal government's laws that have limited the state's power to discriminate against voters. So all those amendments in the Voting Rights Act, those expanded the right to vote. We need to make sure that we can talk about the provisions of the Voting Rights Act, especially pre-clearance. Even though it's gone, even though it was struck down by that Supreme Court case, it was a really important law, and it was very different because it prevented states from passing bad laws in the first place. So this was like judicial review before the law even got passed. We want to make sure that we can explain how policies set up obstacles to people that want to vote. So, anything from the photo ID laws to the registration to having a specific polling place, voting on a Tuesday. We want to talk about the ways that those limit voting. And remember, if even one person wanted to vote but didn't vote, that decreased voter turnout. We also want to describe the policies and describe the ways that states have tried to increase voter turnout. So things like the motor voter law, states that decide to mail ballots to any voter and all that kind of stuff. Those are things that are meant to make it easier on voters, and so those increase voter turnout. All right, so we've spent a couple of days talking about voters and the voters' role in elections. Now we want to shift over and look at things from the campaign side. So we can see the other side of this link. We're going to deal with campaigns so that we can see how the people that want to be in the government can connect to voters through elections.